The little boy counted his money 3 times. It still wasn't enough. He counted it a 4th time anyway. $1, another dollar, a few worn bills, and a small pile of coins that had been collected one by one for weeks. He pushed them together with his tiny fingers. Then he looked up. The guitar was still there, hanging behind the glass, beautiful, untouched, and completely out of his reach. The boy stared at it as if he were looking at a life he could see, but couldn't enter. He was only a few dollars short, but to him, those few dollars might as well have been $1 million. He slowly picked up his coins. His hands were trembling. He had come to the store believing that today would be the day. Today, he would finally take the guitar home. Today, he would place it in his father's old room. Today, he would sit down and play the song his father used to play. But dreams have a cruel way of becoming real, just long enough for you to discover you still can't afford them. The boy looked at the guitar one last time. Then he whispered to himself, "Maybe next time." He turned around and took one step toward the door. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Don't put it back." The boy stopped. His hand tightened around the coins. He slowly turned around, and when he saw who was standing behind him, he forgot how to breathe. Elvis Presley, standing only a few feet away, the man whose face was on magazines, the man whose voice filled theaters, the man millions of people dreamed of meeting, and somehow he was looking directly at him. The boy didn't say a word. Neither did Elvis. For several seconds, they simply stared at each other. Then Elvis looked past the boy, straight at the guitar. "What were you going to do?" The boy swallowed. "Put it back." "Why?" The boy looked down at his money. "Because I can't afford it." Elvis looked at the coins, then at the boy. "How much are you short?" The boy didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to admit it. Finally, he whispered the amount. Elvis nodded. Then he asked, "Is that why you've been standing here staring at it?" The boy nodded. "How long?" "A long time." Elvis smiled. "That's not an answer." The boy hesitated. "Almost an hour." Elvis glanced at the guitar. "An hour?" The boy nodded. "I wanted to remember what it looked like." That sentence changed something in Elvis's face. The boy didn't notice. He was too embarrassed. He started putting the coins back into his pocket. "I'll save more." Elvis watched him. "You really want this guitar?" The boy nodded. "Why?" The boy looked at the instrument. Then he looked at Elvis. And for the first time, his voice became almost impossible to hear. "My dad had one." Elvis said nothing. The boy continued. "It wasn't this nice." He smiled faintly. "It was really old." "What happened to it?" The boy's eyes dropped. "It broke." "When?" "A few months ago." Elvis nodded slowly. "Your father plays?" "He used to." The word "used to" hung in the air. Elvis noticed it. "So he doesn't anymore?" The boy shook his head. "No." "Why?" The boy looked toward the floor. "He can't." Elvis's expression changed. He didn't ask another question. Not yet. The boy tightened his grip around the coins. "My dad used to play every night. After work. Even when he was tired. Sometimes he would sit by the window and play until Mom told him it was late." A small smile appeared on the boy's face. "When he played." He paused. "Everything felt okay." Elvis looked at him carefully. The boy wasn't talking about music anymore. He was talking about home, about memory, about a man who had once made his family feel safe with nothing more than 6 strings and 2 hands. The boy looked back at the guitar. "I want to learn the songs he used to play." Elvis asked, Why? The boy answered without hesitation. So I can play them for him. Elvis's eyes stayed on the boy. And if you can't get this guitar? The boy looked down. I'll keep saving. How long? As long as it takes. Elvis smiled slightly. You know something? The boy looked up. I've heard that before. The boy didn't understand. Elvis did, because there had once been another young man who stood outside doors he couldn't afford to open. Another young man who wanted something the world told him he had no business chasing. Another young man who kept going anyway. Elvis looked at the guitar, then at the boy. Do you play? The boy's confidence disappeared. I try. That's not what I asked. The boy looked embarrassed. I can play a little. A little? The boy nodded. Elvis pointed toward the guitar. Then play. The boy's eyes widened. Here? Here. With people watching? Elvis smiled. Forget them. The boy looked around the store. Several customers had begun watching. The store owner stood silently behind the counter. The boy shook his head. I'll mess up. Elvis stepped closer. You will. The boy looked surprised. Elvis smiled. Everybody does. The boy stared at him. Then Elvis said something that made him finally reach for the guitar. That's how you learn. The store owner took the guitar from the display. He carefully handed it to the boy. The boy held it against his chest. His fingers were shaking. He looked at Elvis one last time. Elvis nodded. Go ahead. The boy played his first note. It wasn't clean. The second one wasn't either. He stopped. A few people exchanged glances. The boy's face turned red. I knew it. He started lowering the guitar. Elvis immediately said, No. The boy looked at him. Don't stop. But you didn't come here to prove you're perfect. Elvis paused. You came here because you love the music. The boy slowly lifted the guitar again. Then he played. One note, then another. His fingers began moving. The mistakes were still there, but something else was there too, determination. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to remember his father. He closed his eyes and played the melody he had heard 100 times from an old, worn-out guitar. The little store became completely silent. Even Elvis didn't move. The boy reached the final notes. His fingers slowed, then stopped. Silence. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked terrified. He expected laughter. Instead, Elvis was still staring at him. The boy whispered, It wasn't very good. Elvis shook his head. No. The boy lowered his eyes. I told you. Elvis stepped closer. That wasn't what I meant. The boy looked up. Elvis pointed toward his chest. You know what you have? The boy said nothing. Something most people spend their whole lives looking for. The boy didn't understand. Elvis continued. You care. Silence. Then Elvis asked, How long have you been practicing? The boy answered, Every night. Even when nobody listens? The boy looked at Elvis. And then came the answer that made Elvis completely silent. Especially when nobody listens. Elvis looked away. For a moment, the superstar disappeared. The cameras weren't there. The fans weren't there. The stage wasn't there. There was only Elvis, remembering the boy he had once been. A boy with a dream. A boy nobody believed in. A boy who kept playing anyway. Elvis looked back at the child. What's your name? The boy told him. Elvis repeated it quietly. Then he looked at the guitar. The boy thought the conversation was over. He started gathering his money again. I'll come back when I have enough. Elvis watched him carefully. Maybe you won't have to. The boy froze. He looked up. What? Elvis didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the store owner. The owner immediately understood that something was about to happen. Elvis walked toward the counter. The boy stood behind him, confused. He had no idea what Elvis was doing. He only knew that Elvis had suddenly become very serious. The store owner looked at Elvis, then at the guitar, then at the boy. Elvis reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter. The boy couldn't see what it was, but when the store owner looked down, his expression changed. The boy stepped forward. What is that? Elvis turned around. For a second, he simply looked at him. Then he smiled. Come here. The boy walked closer. Elvis placed a hand on his shoulder, and then he said 6 words that the boy would remember for the rest of his life. Let's see how badly you want it. The boy had no idea that Elvis wasn't about to give him an easy gift. He was about to give him something much more valuable, a chance. But first, Elvis was going to find out whether the boy truly had what it took to become the musician he dreamed of becoming. And what happened next inside that little guitar store would change the boy's life forever.
The boy didn't understand what Elvis meant. Let's see how badly you want it. Those words kept echoing in his head. He looked at the guitar, then at Elvis, then at the store owner. For a moment, nobody moved. The boy expected Elvis to simply hand him the guitar, but he didn't. Instead, Elvis picked up the instrument and placed it gently into the boy's hands. Sit down. The boy obeyed. He sat on a small wooden stool near the window. Outside, cars moved along the street. People walked past the glass. Nobody knew what was happening inside. Nobody knew that a famous singer was standing in front of a little boy who was about to receive a lesson he would never forget. Elvis pulled another stool closer. He sat directly across from him. Play the same thing again. The boy looked nervous. The same song? The same song. The boy positioned his fingers, then stopped. I might mess up again. Elvis smiled. You probably will. The boy looked confused. Elvis leaned forward. But this time, I want you to make the mistake. What? Don't be afraid of it. The boy stared at him. Elvis pointed toward the strings. Play. The boy began. The first notes came quietly. His fingers were still stiff, but after a few seconds he relaxed. The melody returned. Then came the first difficult part. The boy hesitated. He knew he might miss the note. He looked at Elvis. Elvis didn't move, so the boy continued. He missed it. The note sounded wrong. The boy immediately stopped. Elvis shook his head. Keep going. But I missed it. So? The boy looked at him. Elvis smiled. Music doesn't stop because you made one mistake. The boy continued. Another note, another, then another. This time, he didn't stop. When he finished, Elvis nodded. Better. The boy smiled. Really? No. The smile disappeared. Elvis laughed softly. Better than before. The boy laughed too. It was the first time he had smiled since walking into the store. Elvis noticed. He had wanted that. Not perfection. Confidence. Then Elvis asked, Who taught you that song? My father. Did he teach you everything you know? No. The boy looked down. He taught me how to listen. Elvis became serious again. That might be more important. The boy looked at him. Elvis continued. A lot of people know how to play. He pointed toward the guitar. But very few know how to listen. The boy looked at the instrument. What do I listen for? Elvis smiled. The feeling. The boy didn't answer. Elvis reached out and gently tapped the wooden body of the guitar. Anyone can make noise. He looked directly into the boy's eyes. But making someone feel something? He paused. That is different. The boy nodded slowly. Then Elvis stood. He walked toward the store owner. The owner had been watching the entire exchange. Elvis whispered something to him. The owner nodded, then disappeared into the back room. The boy looked confused. What is he doing? Elvis turned around. Getting something. What? You'll see. A few moments later, the store owner returned carrying an old guitar case. He placed it on the counter. The boy looked at it. What is that? Elvis didn't answer. He opened the case. Inside was an older guitar, scratched, worn. The finish was faded. It had clearly been played for years. The boy stared at it. Something about it looked familiar. Elvis noticed his expression. Your father's guitar? The boy stepped closer. He didn't touch it. I don't know. He looked at the worn wood. My dad's looked like that. Elvis closed the case. Then you understand. The boy looked at him. Understand what? Elvis's voice became quieter. You don't need the most expensive guitar in the room. He looked at the new guitar. You need the one that makes you want to play. The boy looked confused. But I want that one. Elvis smiled. I know. Then he picked up the new guitar. He handed it back. That's why we're not finished. The boy held it. Elvis stepped backward. Play something you know. The boy played. Then Elvis interrupted. Now play it differently. The boy stopped. How? Don't copy your father. The boy stared. Then what do I do? Make it yours. The boy looked frightened. He had never thought about that. He had spent months trying to play exactly like his father. Elvis was asking him to find his own sound. The boy tried again. This time he changed the rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. Elvis smiled. There. The boy stopped. What? That. What did I do? You stopped trying to sound like somebody else. The boy looked down at the guitar. For the first time, he understood. Maybe his father hadn't given him music so he could become a copy. Maybe he had given him music so he could become himself. Elvis walked closer. You know what I see when I look at you? The boy shook his head.
A kid who doesn't understand how good he could become. The boy laughed nervously. I'm not that good. Elvis shook his head. That's not the point. What is? Elvis looked toward the guitar. You showed up. The boy remained silent. You saved your money. You came here. You were scared. You played anyway. Elvis looked directly at him. That matters. The boy's eyes began to fill with tears. He quickly looked away. He didn't want Elvis to see. But Elvis did, and he didn't mention it. Instead, he asked, Do you know what happens to most people with dreams? The boy shook his head. They quit before anyone has a chance to see what they could become. Why? Because nobody claps in the beginning. The boy listened carefully. No audience. No applause. No one telling you you're special. Elvis paused. Just you and the work. The boy nodded. Elvis continued. If you can keep going when nobody is watching, he pointed toward the guitar, then one day, people might. The boy stared at him. And if they don't? Elvis smiled. Then you keep playing. The words hit the boy deeply, because suddenly he understood. Elvis wasn't really talking about the guitar. He was talking about life. Then the store owner returned to the counter. He leaned toward Elvis and whispered something. Elvis nodded. The boy watched. Something was happening. Something he couldn't understand. Elvis reached into his pocket again. This time, he pulled out his wallet. The boy's eyes widened. "No!" Elvis looked at him. "What? I can't take your money." Elvis smiled. "Who said anything about giving you money?" The boy looked confused. Elvis walked toward the counter. He looked at the guitar, then at the price tag. The number was far beyond the boy's savings. The boy saw it too. His expression fell. He already knew. He stepped backward. "I'll save." Elvis looked at him. "How long?" The boy didn't answer. "A year?" "Maybe." "2 years?" The boy shrugged. "Maybe." Elvis nodded. Then he looked at the store owner. "Wrap it." The boy froze. "What?" Elvis didn't repeat himself. The store owner reached for the guitar. The boy stepped forward. "Wait!" Elvis turned. "I can't." His voice cracked. "I don't have enough." Elvis smiled. "I know." "But—" Elvis walked toward him. "You don't have to." The boy stared at him. Then Elvis placed his hand on the guitar. "This isn't about how much money you have." He looked at the boy. "It's about what you're willing to do with the chance." The boy couldn't speak. Elvis picked up the guitar case. Then he placed it into the boy's hands. The boy stared at it. His lips trembled. "Why?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. He looked at the boy for several seconds. Then he said, "Because somebody once gave me a chance." The boy looked up. "Who?" Elvis smiled faintly. "People who believed in me before the world did." The boy held the guitar tighter. Elvis continued, "Now it's your turn." The boy began crying, not loudly, just tears rolling down his face. Elvis put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't waste it." The boy nodded. "I won't." "Promise?" "I promise." Elvis looked into his eyes. "Then there's one more thing." The boy wiped his face. "What?" Elvis leaned closer and spoke quietly. "This guitar won't make you a musician." The boy stared at him. Elvis tapped the boy's chest. "You will." The boy nodded. But Elvis wasn't finished. "Tomorrow morning." The boy listened. "You practice." The boy nodded. "The next day?" "I practice." "And when you're tired?" "I practice." "When nobody believes you?" The boy hesitated, then answered, "I practice." Elvis smiled. "Good." The boy hugged the guitar case against his chest. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the most important thing Elvis had given him. The guitar was only the beginning, because years later, when thousands of people would know the boy's name, when enormous crowds would scream his name, when cameras would flash, when he would stand beneath the brightest lights of his life, someone would ask him a simple question. Who gave you your first real chance? And the answer would take him straight back to this little guitar store, back to the boy he used to be, back to the man standing in front of him, back to one sentence he would never forget. This guitar won't make you a musician. You will. But before the boy left the store that day, Elvis had one final request, and that request would become the promise that changed everything. The boy stood at the door with the guitar case pressed tightly against his chest. He still couldn't believe it. Just a few minutes earlier, that guitar had been sitting behind glass, completely out of his reach. Now it was his. But before he could leave, Elvis called his name. The boy turned around. Elvis was standing near the counter. He looked at the boy for a moment and then pointed toward the guitar. "Remember what I told you?" The boy nodded. "This guitar won't make you a musician." "You will." The boy smiled. But Elvis wasn't finished. There will be days when you don't feel good enough. There will be days when your fingers hurt. There will be days when you play the same song 100 times and still don't get it right. And there will be people who tell you to give up. The boy listened carefully. Elvis stepped closer. And one day you might believe them. The boy looked down. Elvis gently lifted his chin. When that happens, remember today. Remember the boy who walked into this store with almost nothing. Remember the boy who was afraid, but still played. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Elvis smiled. That's the boy you can't disappoint. The boy nodded. I promise. Elvis held out his hand. The boy shook it. Then Elvis pulled him into a brief hug. Never stop playing just because nobody believes in you. I won't. Good. The boy turned toward the door. He took a few steps, then stopped. He looked back at Elvis. Thank you. Elvis smiled. Don't thank me. The boy looked confused. Elvis pointed toward the guitar. Make it worth it. The boy nodded. Then he walked out of the store. The door closed behind him. Elvis watched him disappear down the street. Neither of them knew what would happen next. Neither of them knew how far that little boy would go. But the boy remembered every word, and he kept his promise. Years passed. The little boy grew older, but the guitar never left him. He practiced before school. He practiced after dinner. He practiced when his fingers hurt. He practiced when he was tired. And most importantly, he practiced when nobody was listening. There were nights when he wanted to quit. There were nights when he looked at the guitar and wondered if he would ever become good enough. There were nights when other musicians seemed better than him, faster than him, more talented than him. But every time he thought about giving up, he remembered Elvis. Not the superstar, not the man millions of people screamed for. He remembered the man who had stood inside a small guitar store and looked at a frightened little boy as if his dream actually mattered. So he kept going. One song became 10. 10 became 100. Small performances became bigger performances. He played in tiny rooms where only a few people listened. Then he played in small clubs, then theaters, then larger stages. There were failures. There were embarrassing performances. There were nights when almost nobody came, but he kept playing. Because Elvis had taught him something that had nothing to do with fame. You don't need an audience to prove that your dream matters. You need the courage to keep working when nobody is watching. And slowly, people began to notice. His name started appearing on posters, then newspapers, then radio programs, then television. The little boy who once counted his last few dollars in a guitar store was becoming a real musician. But he never forgot where his story began. Years later, thousands of people filled a concert hall. The lights went down. The crowd erupted. Then the musician walked onto the stage. He was no longer the frightened little boy from the guitar store. He was older, confident, experienced. He had spent years earning every note. The audience screamed his name. He smiled. Then he lifted the guitar, the same guitar, the guitar Elvis had given him. It was old now. The wood carried scratches. The finish had faded. The instrument had been played thousands of times. He could have replaced it. He could have bought something newer, something more expensive, something more impressive. But he never did. Because that guitar was more than an instrument. It was a memory. It was a promise. It was proof that someone had believed in him before the world ever knew his name. The musician walked toward the microphone. The audience became quiet. He looked down at the guitar. Then he looked at the crowd. Before I ever played for a crowd, one man believed I deserved a chance. The room became silent. He took a breath. Elvis Presley. The audience erupted. Applause filled the entire hall. But the musician didn't move. He simply looked at the guitar. Then he spoke again. This guitar is the first real guitar I ever owned. He paused. But that's not why I kept it. The crowd became quiet again. This guitar reminds me of someone who believed in me before I had anything to prove. He didn't know if I would become famous. He didn't know if I would become successful. He didn't even know if I would become a great musician. But he saw something in me. The musician's voice began to shake. He saw a kid who refused to stop trying. The audience remained completely silent, and he gave me a chance. A tear rolled down the musician's face. He looked at the guitar, then quietly said, "Thank you, Elvis." The entire audience stood. The applause became deafening. But the musician simply held the guitar against his chest. Then he sat down. He placed his fingers on the strings, and he began to play. The first notes were gentle, simple, familiar. They sounded like the kind of melody a father might play at home after a long day. The musician closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't on a massive stage. He was back in that little house. Back when he was a child. Back when his father still played the old guitar. Back when music made everything feel okay. Then another memory returned. Elvis standing in the guitar store. Elvis looking at him. Elvis telling him not to stop. The musician opened his eyes. He continued playing. The final notes slowly faded away. The concert hall became silent. Then thousands of people stood together. The applause was enormous. But the musician didn't look at them. He looked down at the guitar. He placed one hand on the worn wood and whispered, "Elvis didn't just give me a guitar. He gave me a reason to believe in my dream." The audience erupted again, but the musician simply smiled, because after all those years, he finally understood what Elvis had really given him. It wasn't a guitar. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was belief. One person had looked at a little boy who couldn't afford his dream and decided that the boy deserved a chance to chase it. And sometimes that's all a person needs. Not money, not fame, not a perfect beginning. Just one person who looks at you and says, "You can do this." Because dreams don't always disappear because we fail. Sometimes they disappear because nobody ever tells us they're worth fighting for. That day, Elvis Presley didn't just buy a guitar. He gave a little boy a chance. And that boy spent the rest of his life proving that the chance was worth it. Because the greatest gift you can give someone isn't always something they can hold in their hands. Sometimes the greatest gift is making them believe they can become the person they've always dreamed of becoming.